Greetings and salutations. It is I, Mr. Nothing, the museum curator of the weird and the strange and the host who might be a ghost. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the strange and unusual literature that I have found in my travels, in my various travels to undiscovered lands that may be hidden in the Amazon rainforest. So today I wanted to talk about a book that is about a journey to an undiscovered location. It's about dinosaurs. It's about pterodactyls, which is a kind of dinosaur. And it's about Ape Men, of all things. I am talking about The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Here is the book cover. It's not an original edition, but it does have a dinosaur on the cover, and people love dinosaurs. I get the feeling that it specifically has a dinosaur to confuse you with Michael Crichton's The Lost World. Specifically because there were a lot of Lost World adaptations after The Lost World, the second Jurassic Park movie, came out, and I can't help but feel that was like an attempt to cash in on the dinosaur craze. But you know, I don't know 100% for sure. Still, it's an interesting cover. I got it from the library. Don't forget to patronize your library, as that is a great time to be had by everyone. What do I need to say about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle? He's a pretty prolific author. He wrote the Sherlock Holmes series, in addition to a number of other books. Sherlock Holmes is like iconic. An interesting note is that he intended to kill off Sherlock Holmes in one of his books because he just didn't want to write about him anymore. But fan feedback eventually made him realize that there needed to be more stories about him. So he wrote a lot about Sherlock Holmes. He also wrote about Professor Challenger, who's in this book. He appears in a couple different stories, all science-based, some of them spiritual-based, because later in his life, Doyle became more spiritual. So he has a lot of work under his belt. And I don't really feel like I need to explain a lot more because Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is such a mainstay in literature and in pop culture. So yeah, there's that. So The Lost World focuses on Ed Malone. He is an Irish reporter looking for the story of a lifetime. And the beginning of the book starts out with him talking to a lady that he is sweet on. Her name is Gladys, and could you imagine wanting to date a person named Gladys? Is anybody named Gladys these days still? He asks. He wants to go out with her. He wants to start dating her and possibly get married to her. But Gladys is hesitant. She's like, women seek men who are heroic, who are dashing and handsome and majestic and who do great things in life. And you haven't done great things in life just yet. Which is kind of upsetting to Ed. And he's like, well, how do I go out and do heroic things? And she says, sort of the underlying theme of this book, everywhere there are heroisms. Everywhere there are heroisms, something like that. But basically, there are plenty of opportunities to go out and become heroic and noble. And all you need to do is search for those opportunities. And so Ed leaves Gladys and then is like, I'm definitely going to go prove myself. He works at the Gazette, which is a newspaper based somewhere in England. He talks to his editor and is like, I want to be put on a story with a little bit of danger so I can prove myself. and his editor puts him into contact with a scientist, Professor Challenger. He kind of laughs at Ed when he assigns him to this, because Challenger has been noted to beat up other reporters because of their doubts on the story that he's been talking about. And so Ed goes there, and Challenger's a bit reluctant to talk at first, and when Ed challenges him, Professor Challenger beats him up a bit, and a cop shows up and is like, "What's going on?" And Ed doesn't talk, which kind of endears him to Challenger, and that he's willing to take this abuse for the story. So Challenger decides to tell him about what he's discovered, and that is that he went to a land in Brazil, in the Amazon, where there were strange tribes and unusual animals. And unfortunately, he doesn't have any proof because his boat crashed, and he lost that proof. And, Ed is skeptical, of course, but he decides to follow Challenger around, maybe to see how extensive the story is. And this happens to be the night where Challenger is going to a symposium. And when he goes there, he talks about what he's discovered and how this kind of upsets the balance of science. And, everyone at the convention or the symposium is skeptical as well. A man named Professor Summerlee calls him out and says, "This doesn't sound at all possible, and you're providing us with no evidence. We can't just simply go on your word." And that's a valid point right there. They can't just simply go on his word. Challenger says, "Okay, well, what if I lead an expedition into this area and come back with proof? Will you believe me then?" And the people are like, "Yeah, sure, I guess." And so Ed, realizing his opportunity to prove himself, volunteers to go on the trip, as does Professor Summerlee, who I think wants to discredit Challenger at this point. And another man volunteers, John Roxton. And Ed and Roxton get a chance to talk, and Roxton reveals that he's sort of a noble adventurer type dude, and he has spent his time breaking up slavery, and I think in Africa and in South America. He ended up killing a couple slave drivers in the process, and so he's viewed as like a man who can handle himself and is also fighting for a somewhat noble cause. Roxton is good as like backup during this whole thing. And so they all take a trip over to Brazil, and they bring a black man with them. And that's very racist, the way that Conan writes his speech. And they also bring along some Indians to go back and forth so that they can send correspondence to the outside world and get them out of sticky situations. So they make their way into this unusual land that the other natives in the area just don't go into, because they're like, this is weird and unusual, and we're kind of scared of this, which is reasonable of them. They make their way up to a plateau, and one of the men, Gomez, who's on the trip, cuts a tree that served as like a way for them to get down and up off this plateau. Oh, and his reasoning for this is that Roxton killed his brother when he was liberating slaves earlier. So this is his revenge, is stranding him on this plateau. And why he didn't just kill him in his sleep, that's kind of iffy. He's not a very smart man, it would seem. So they're stranded on this plateau, and they're just trying to figure out their way, how to get down, and while they're also exploring this area. During the night, one of the nights, like they're cooking this wild boar type food that they found. And while they're cooking it, a giant bird thing swoops down and steals it from them. And Summerlee just looks around and is like, okay, I guess I was wrong. I guess pterodactyls are real. And Challenger feels, justified there because he proved himself, and he also got to rub it in Summerlee's nose. During their trip, they also encounter iguanodons, dinosaurs of the carnivorous and non-carnivorous nature, and they have to flee the carnivorous ones. And they also encounter ape men who are hostile towards the group. At one point, while while Ed is exploring the area and naming various lakes after Gladys, he comes back to the camp and he discovers that Roxton, Challenger, and Summerlee are all gone. So he sets out to go find them, and he discovers that they were kidnapped by the Ape Men. And so Roxton, in addition to working with Ed and the native Indians who aren't like the Ape Men at all, they work together to just go to war against the Ape Men, and they went successfully. They successfully managed to cause the genocide of an entire species of human-like creatures, and Doyle even notes, like the narrator even notes, that these some of the remaining Ape Men will be enslaved or even worse, punished in some sort of way. And then after this, the group uses the combination of like the cave system and a hot air balloon to get off the plateau, and they make their way back over to England to a symposium where they have a little more evidence. And some of the people in the symposium believe them, and other people don't. There's one specific professor who much like Summerlee, is questioning how any of this is valid, which I think is a nice circular kind of like symmetry there, where like in the before you had the doubter and the after you still have the doubter, because people are always going to doubt even with additional evidence. And so Challenger's like sort of power move is that he captured one of the pterodactyls, and he put like he reveals it to the audience, and a lot of people are scared, and some people are clapping like, wow, this is evidence, all right, and other people are just, it's just a general fury of like answers. And all this confusion, the pterodactyl manages to fly away and fly out of an open window. Why was there an open window in a place where you knew there was going to be a pterodactyl? Professor Challenger, you are not the smartest man. And the pterodactyl can be seen flying all over England. And like the narrator notes that the pterodactyl is flying back to the Brazil area, but I have to wonder if it's not going to like nest somewhere in the United Kingdom and just start eating people. Like Professor Challenger, in solving one problem with the lack of believers, might have just created another problem entirely. And so after this, Ed goes back to Gladys and discovers that she's married now. And it turns out she's married to just a common clerk. And so he's like, well, what happened to this heroism thing? Like, I thought you wanted to marry a hero. And she's like, I decided not to. So it turns out all of this was for nothing. What a wasted trip. He got all these experiences and memories, and it was all for nothing. Women, you know? I believe it's Roxton who reveals at the very end that he managed to get a whole bunch of diamonds from this native, this region. And so he ended up cashing it in. And so it's like $50,000 for everyone, which was probably a lot of money in England at the time. And everyone talks about what they're going to do next, and Roxton reveals that he's just going to go back there and try to see more about what he can learn. And Ed decides, I'm gonna join you because they developed a friendship, and isn't that beautiful? And that's pretty much the end of the story there. So that was The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Interestingly, that is not the full title. It's The Lost World, being an account of the recent amazing adventures of Professor E. Challenger, Lord John Roxton, Professor Summerlee, and Mr. Ed Malone of the Daily Gazette. So that's a pretty extensive title right there. Yeah, and so there's a couple of things that I do really enjoy about this story. The first being that it does give you a sense of like adventure going through it, like as Ed tries to like escape the Ape Men or run away from the dinosaurs that they encounter, or even like the first time that they encounter a pterodactyl as it swoops down on him. Like that's very interesting and thrilling, and like I feel like it does this better than Journey to the Center of the Earth, because I'm going to make a lot of comparisons between the two, because they do have similar vibes, which is exploring a world that's been hidden for quite some time. And so with Journey to the Center of the Earth, it was more of a travelogue. It didn't feel very adventurous. But this story does. It has a bit more personality with the characters and what happens. I do have to applaud Sir Arthur Conan Doyle for infusing this story with a bit more adventure, which is pretty solid. And I do have to give Sir Arthur Conan Doyle some credit because this is kind of like one of the first of its kind. You had Journey to the Center of the Earth, which was in 1864, and this was in the 1910s. So it came a bit later, but it was still one of the first stories to feature dinosaurs, which were a relatively new concept after the Bone Wars of the late 1800s. But also, he's talking about like ape men, which are descended from humans in some way or connected to humans in some way. There's a lot of stuff that he's incorporating that would become the foundation of later works. Dinosaurs, for instance, with Jurassic Park. The idea of a hidden world with tribes that already exist there, that's kind of based on, that's what King Kong is kind of based on. So a lot of future literature borrowed heavily from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's story here, and I gotta give him credit for that. Again, there are a lot of similarities to Journey to the Center of the Earth here. The most foremost being that they're exploring a hidden world, and in Journey to the Center of the Earth, you have that gas ball underneath the center of the Earth that sort of lightens everything up, and that's pretty cool. But there's like a number of cool things here too, like the iguanodons and the pterodactyls. Journey to the Center of the Earth didn't talk about what happened after, and that's how they just like the story just jumps forward and is like, oh yeah, everyone believed the explorers in that case. But I like here how there are some doubters. Like even presented with evidence, people are like, it's fake and made up. And so I think that's how science goes. Like even with proof, people are still going to doubt it. There's always going to be that person who's a little skeptical. And for valid reasons. A lot of times in science, a lot of things seem ridiculous, but are eventually proven true. I also want to say how like xenophobic and racist and sexist this book kind of is. It's sexist because like Gladys at the beginning says, well, like all women want a hero in some way, someone to sweep them off their feet. And why does a woman need like some man to sweep her off her feet? I get this was written in like the Victorian age, so like of course that's going to be the widespread thought right there. But why can't a woman save herself? And it's just like at the very end, like Gladys turns out to not want to be swept off her feet by a heroic man. She settles for a normal dude. And so like the way the story portrays Gladys is kind of ridiculous. And then it's also plenty racist because one of the characters, Zombo, I think his name is a black man who's like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle writes his dialogue as like stereotypically black servanty at the time, and it's pretty horrendous. And then xenophobic as well because of how he portrays the Indian characters and how like they're kind of viewed as savages, and like even the native Brazilians are kind of viewed as savages as well. And there's also that weird kind of thing where like they discover this land and then the Brazilian government asks them about it before the story ends, and they're like, oh yeah, we don't know where it's at, even though they clearly do know where it's at. And because John Roxton discovered those diamonds, like they could tell Brazil about it and they could have access to those diamonds and be able to like use the resources that are in their country. But it's weird how they're just like, oh yeah, Brazil doesn't get to keep their own resources, we're going to plunder it. So kind of colonialist underpinnings there, which don't sit well with me. And it's very of the time. Like other stories are probably doing this at the time, but I don't feel like that's a good enough excuse for doing it. So that's The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. It was an interesting book. I was certainly entertained by it. But would I recommend it? I would say probably not. If you want to read a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle book, absolutely go ahead and seek this out. but I wouldn't go out of your way to find it. I think there's probably a lot of other stories that do what it's trying to do a lot better. Maybe in a less racist or sexist kind of way. If you have anything to say about the story, if you've read it before, or simply want to comment on something I said, don't forget to leave a comment below. I would love to talk to you about this book. Otherwise, you can like, share, and subscribe to get the message out there, or to hype me up in some way, so that we can talk about dinosaurs and ape men in the future. But until then, I wish you a pleasant time in your weird travels. Goodbye.